Caroline Hunter. When I first met Caroline, she was doing the exercises with another woman whose name I have forgotten at the polar bears. Eleanor, right? And we used to go down there at 7:30 in the morning and exercise. But lots of times I wouldn't get in because it was so cold. But when Caroline was leading them, there was no such thing as not getting into the water. There's something about her demeanor that made you do what she said. And no matter how cold it was, I would always go in when she was there. And little did I know that quite a few people follow her words, no matter what the conditions are. She's a literate, empathetic scientist. You don't get that every day. Her degree's in chemistry. And she was also an anti-apartheid activist. Who knew? When she was in her 30s, she found out that her boss, the Polaroid Corporation, was involved in South African apartheid system. So she and her husband, Ken Williams, formed the Polaroid Revolutionary Workers Movement. They were the very first activists to challenge corporations with South African investments. And after 1 year, Polaroid retracted and never went back again. And within 6 years, Polaroid completely pulled out of Africa. Our girl Caroline had led a boycott for 7 years. So many people followed her words that forced them out, okay? So the question to me, for me, Caroline, is during that time in America, all my liberal friends, including me, were saying, oh, tisk tisk, how horrible those things are in South Africa, and gee willikers, something should be done. But nobody did diddly squat. We still did businesses with them. We were still giving them money. We still had banks that dealt with them. And then you come along, not yet 30, maybe early 30 years old, and you say,
23.
23, my God, you were just out of school, right? And what makes you think you could change something?
Well, I think it's a lot of factors, but once we found out that Polaroid was making the passport photos for South Africa, and once we did investigation, and for those people in my age group, we went to the encyclopedias, okay? I went to the library and checked out library books. This is no internet, no personal computers. Cell phones did not exist, 1970. Once we understood the impact of Polaroid's involvement, not just as a corporation doing business in South Africa, but as the maker of passport photos, which was considered the handcuffs for Black South Africans, where more than 80% of Black South Africans have been arrested for passport violations, where if we had a meeting and my passport is not on my person, it's on the door, it's someplace else, I can be arrested. No habeas corpus, no right of review. You could be jailed. Nobody can find you. You could slip out of a window, die in the bar of soap, you name it. So once we found out the magnitude of what Polaroid was doing, the fact that we were Polaroid employees, we felt we had to do something. Now, we were naive in thinking the corporation was going to respond to us positively. But once we found out, I don't think there was any turning back.
Well, I worked at Doyle Dane at the time, which had the Polaroid account. And they could have done any number of things to express their dissatisfaction with the situation. And they were a big corporation, advertising agency, but it never even occurred to them to do that. So something...
Well, I think they did. I mean, when you look at the whole campaign and you look at what Polaroid did, and you look at their response, they basically said, we're representing the American corporate entity. It's not just Polaroid. It's everybody. In other words, you got people on the board of directors from General Motors, from IBM, from all the major corporations who are on Polaroid's board of directors. And at that time, you got to remember, the activists were talking about multinational corporations with interlocking directorates that brought us into war, like the Vietnam War, and had kept low wages in this country. Polaroid was a non-union company. Some of these other companies had unions, but it was after a result of a great struggle. So, you see, if you look back and look at it from the business school point of view, and there are many business cases about this situation, you see Polaroid saying, we're going to take one for the team. What's going to be our strategy? Okay. So rather than respond, we used to joke and say, well, we think if we were at General Motors, they'd have dumped us in the East River. Okay. Knowing the different relationships, the public image and aura of these corporations. And we weren't thinking about that, but we were thinking of the agency and the fact that we were Polaroid workers, and we felt we had a right to determine what happened to our labor. But Polaroid takes this stance. No, we're going to say, are we really in South Africa? Oh, what's the impact of our product in our business? Let us study this thing. Let us bring in experts who we trust, Chief Buthelezi, apologists for South Africa, intellectuals. We're going to put together a group of Blacks and whites, workers and corporate people. Of course, the corporate people have the edge because they've sold the product to South Africa. They know the situation. For many Black people, this is the first time they're hearing about South Africa. Okay, some of these workers. And so we're going to bring this group together and we're going to study the situation. And then somebody says, wow, Black people don't want to be told in this country what to do. Let's go to South Africa and see what the Black people say. We're going to send a Black person, an Armenian person, and 2 white people. One of them's on our 2 of them on our employees committee, which mediates employees disputes, but somehow it always seems that the balance is always in the corporate favor. So we're going to send these people over, along with the first vice president of international sales who made the deal. And we're going to say to the Black person on the street, should Polaroid take these pictures? Now, they don't know it's against the law to say you hate apartheid. It's against the law to talk about protest. It's against the law to refuse a passport photo. And when you don't have it, you can die.
No, when you say against the law, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of against the law?
Well, if you don't have it on your person, you could be fined, whipped.
Fine, but go to jail. Go to jail? Okay.
By the government, whipped or beaten by the police. That's legal. Jailed.
Okay. I just wanted to know. Right. I thought that.
Okay. Have your heart taken out. Have your heart taken out by Christian Bernard while you're alive. Okay.
Well,
things can happen to you.
Want to make sure it's beating. But wait, let me go to when you went to Washington. Didn't you?
So now you go to this environment. And you said to people, should we have our passport photos taken? Well, what are they going to say? It's quick. The headlines in South Africa say, past camera bosses visit South Africa. So Polaroid comes back and they say, well, the Black people say we should take the picture. The headlines in South Africa say, Polaroid with this holier than thou attitude still does business here. So we're not persuaded, wow, you hate apartheid of America, but you come over here and you take the money. Okay? And the Secretary of Labor also says, no matter what Polaroid says about experimenting in South Africa and giving scholarships and raising Black employee salaries, no Black will ever hold a position held by whites. No Black will ever make a salary ever made by whites. No Black will ever supervise a white. So they just participate in the apartheid system.
Okay, but when you went to Washington, yes, but you were a key witness or what do you call a speaker in Washington, right?
We testified for 2 things. We testified before the United Nations first, the Special Committee on Apartheid, which greatly welcomed us. We were welcomed by the African delegates, and our testimony was well received. And then we testified before the Foreign Relations Committee for the U.S. House of Representatives.
So you knew then that you were a target. Did you not know that you were a target?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so didn't you get scared?
The only time I was afraid is when I got we're going to turn you into alligator meat letter slipped into my mailbox, where the only person who could get into the mailbox was the mailman with a key. And he had told us that some guys had come to him to ask him to intercept our mail, and he refused. He was just a plain old average white guy who believed in the privacy of mail and the sanctity of his job.
So, but you knew.
And unfortunately, I was so afraid that Ken destroyed that letter. Otherwise, it would
That's
be
what I'm
something
saying. Right.
Yeah,
that's
it would
what
be something to show. Yeah.
But
so
yeah,
the threats and intimidation were deep and wide. Yeah.
And you didn't back down.
No, not at all. I think it comes from how I was raised. I was raised by a strong family foundation, a very, very strong, good Catholic mother. Okay. who, after you did your chores, you had to go up the street and see if Miss What's her name needed her sidewalk swept because she didn't have kids or grandkids. I'll go to the store for so and so. Okay. And it was that community value. If you did something wrong, by the time you got home, the store was there waiting for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I grew up in that kind of village, 5 blocks from my school, where everybody knew everybody. And everybody knew the Hunter girls and what was expected of us. And the interesting thing is that in 10th grade, I went to a Catholic school where I lived under segregation. I think that's the other thing that makes this important in terms of the story. I grew up under segregation. I don't think enough people really, if you haven't lived under segregation, you don't understand of it as America's apartheid. Okay.
Yeah, Bolton did a
That
piece
separate
on
but
that.
equal meant we had Black everything. Okay, but it was still an apartheid system. So when I crossed town to go to from my neighborhood to my high school, my Black high school, I had to sit behind a sign on a public bus. I had to get up if white people wanted to sit where I sat. Okay, there were certain establishments in my neighborhood where we could only order; we couldn't go in and sit down.
Yeah.
We could shop in the downtown stores, but we could not eat at the lunch counter. We could not try clothes on in the store.
So why were you not intimidated? But wait, so how'd you become so brave?
I don't know. You gotta ask the ancestors. I think I,
Oh, wait a second. Did you have role models? Did you have any role models?
well, I think all the role models were the role models of the civil rights movement. And then as I grew older, by the time I got to Cambridge, Malcolm X was my role model. Malcolm X was my hero. There was a time when I turned off TV and said, I've had enough. I've been educated in white culture. I'm only reading Black books. I don't want to watch TV. My father was very upset. He wanted me to have a TV. He said, you're going to miss the space launch. I said, it could be a lie.
That's true.
I came of my age, but the incubation was in that New Orleans Black community where you worked twice as hard because you knew you could achieve something and you saw the role models of achievement.
You saw the role models? Which role models did you see?
We had doctors, we had lawyers, we had teachers, we had Black people who were achieving things. Okay. It was that up the ladder kind of situation, but you saw it as an uphill battle, not a downhill battle.
Wow.
And in 10th grade, this is the interesting part. In 10th grade, my teacher, I had a rare white lay teacher. We grew up with Black teachers, male and female Black teachers, and white religious teachers, nuns. And in 10th grade, Mr. Valda, who was a white Catholic lay teacher, taught me social studies and introduced us to Cry to Beloved Country.
Oh.
So here I am in 10th grade, reading Cry to Beloved Country. I think, Abby, it was the first time I saw my Black self in print. Because even though we went to Black school, we didn't learn Black history per se.
They didn't have it.
We knew about Martin Luther King, but it wasn't an academic subject where you learn Black history. I don't even know Louisiana history other than what I've taught myself beyond high school. We were in the classic education, 4 years of French, German, 4 years of Latin, 2 years of German, 2 years of French, lab science, okay? I had physics, chemistry, botany, biology, all in high school with lab science. We didn't have phys ed. Phys ed was jumping up and down because we didn't have a phys ed education thing, but we had sports, but we had a classic education. So here I am reading Cry to Beloved Country in 10th grade. I was so moved by that book that I wrote about it in my 10th grade math book. The top of the page, there's a quote from Cry to Beloved Country. The bottom of the page, there's a quote from Crime and Punishment, a 1,000-page novel by Dostoevsky. I was a little Black nerd, but in the middle of that is little love songs and love poems and everything else a 10th grader would do. And I recited passages to people from Cry to Beloved Country. I bored them. So now you fast forward 10 years later, bench chemists at Polaroid. You think about the work of the ancestors. Ken Williams and I turn around and see an ID card with the face of a Black person who worked in his lab, the only other Black person in the Photoshop with him. But he's got an African name, and it says Department of the Mind, Union of South Africa. So Ken says, if you pick it up and look at it, I didn't know Polaroid was in South Africa. And I say, I didn't know that either, but I know that's a bad place for Black people. Because everything I learned in 10th grade comes back.
And cry the beloved country.
Here comes Dr. King saying, you're not free, what? Unless everybody is free, right?
Yes.
And here's my mother saying, two wrongs don't make a right. So you tell me, why did I do what I did? And who stood behind me? Who pushed me forward?
Yeah, they pushed you forward in what you and I would call the right direction. Some people were pushed, right? But some people were pushed forward to climb that capitalist ladder to become equal to the white people, not, in a sense that I want your job and that's right. So you chose the heroic way. Heroic, maybe.
Well, see, I think that's still that community foundation, that community spirit, that incubation of what and how I was raised. And I wasn't raised to just get out there and be by myself. I was raised as a part of a village that would make the village proud whether I came back.
Yeah, that's very important. Make the village proud when you came back. Right. Okay. I mean, I must say, did Free Southern Theater in New Orleans, and I was scared every minute of the day.
Yes. Well, it depends on when you were there, but again, it's a cultural incubation. It's a root planted deep. Okay, and people now can go back and see the parallels from Congo Square. And I did a research paper. The very interesting thing is that free public schooling started in New Orleans. Okay, you have historic newspapers, the Tribune, which still exists now, but Black newspapers then, by the free Black people published, where they were educated to the passant blanc. This is the whole miscegenation story, where the French saw their children, regardless of how the lineage of a child in France is paternal, no matter the circumstances of the father. So even when the French intermarried, either with an enslaved woman or a free woman of color, the father had an obligation to take care of that child. So what the French did is they sent their passant blancs, the French, to be educated and brought them back to teach their own children. And they worked that way. And in the evenings, they taught Black people for free. So I had a paper that I did when I was in graduate school where you see, my sister had bought this picture, where you see this institution with these columns and these big stairs. And everywhere you can find a place to sit is an enslaved person coming to learn to read after they finish their chores. Because the French had a system you could work during the day and in the evening you had some free time.
Was it against the law at that time? Was it against the law or legal?
The French had a different state, it's different system. When the British came in, you began to see the Black codes and all of those other things coming in. Women had to wrap their hair again and that sort of thing. So no, there was so that foundation.
Well, and how are your children getting that foundation from you? Are they? Lisette? I'm talking about Lisette.
Oh, absolutely. I've lived long enough now to be from her to be the daughter of Caroline Hunter, to be the mother of Lisette. So Lisette does public events. I'm just hanging around holding her coat. And they say, oh, so nice and so proud. Yeah. So no, she's
no, that's wonderful. But my question, what really should have been, is: are there any causes that you feel so strongly about today that you would give all of that fearless energy that came from your village?
Well, I think I'm doing that in many different ways. During pandemic, we did a campaign, Free Purpose Pain, which Lisette marshaled, but led out of the Black Lives Matter movement, where we discovered a young man, Purpose Pain, who's living with intellectual disabilities, who's been on death row in Nashville, Tennessee for 34 years. Through our meetings and our gatherings, Susan Sarandon brought us Ndume Olatoshunde, who is a prison inmate released after 20 years, served 20 years on death row with Purvis, released on an Alford plea, but he was convicted of a crime he never did. And Ndume had a body of artwork and through the auspices of some wonderful people, we had a fundraiser in Chilmark where we raised about 47,000 for Purpose's family and 45,000 for Dumi working as an artist. And we're still working on that campaign under the headline of Disrupt Death Throat. We have an online group that we still do that service work. And we hope one day to bring Purpose when he's free to Martha's Vineyard for celebration.
Oh, great.
So Lizette Marshall, that she now does, she's working at a culinary arts program that services adults 18 to 50 or over. And she also teaches in the jail, the Suffolk County Jail, which she enjoys. Beyond that, I'm on the Cambridge School Committee.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of talked myself into that.
No, grateful. But are you making are you affecting change at this Cambridge School Committee?
Well, it's an interesting job. As a teacher, a veteran teacher and administrator, I had 34 years experience in Cambridge. The ability to make change is relative. What you can do with students versus what you can do as an assistant principal versus what you can do on the school committee. And so I joined, we have ranked voting in Cambridge, and I lost by 106 votes in 2021, ranked votes. And one of the people on the committee resigned. So I've been on the school committee since December. So I'm joining a year in. But it's not a circumstance I'm unfamiliar with in the sense that I'm one of the most qualified people on the committee because I'm a former educator with 34 years experience. I've done everything a teacher can do. And an administrator as well as my child went through the district. But education, if there was a magic wand, it would have been waved before now.
Okay.
We're dealing with all the inequities of the system, all of the harms of the pandemic for our children and our teachers. And at the same time, all of the social problems of social media, and still trying to challenge young people to get a good education and update our education so it's not just a go to college model, but it has really substantial vocational programs. Cambridge is one of those districts that years ago cut out the plumbing and the electrical to go for the modern careers, and you know what it takes to get a plumber. An electrician, and yet I think one of the things our regional high school does on the Vineyard is it has those careers as viable. So we're juggling all of that. So I wish I could tell you I got on and everything went up, but no.
It takes time. Right.
In a district that has money, okay, and cares for kids.
Tell me just one last thing. What advice would you give to activists, young activists of today?
Well, I would say, first of all, we all must be activists, whether one calls themselves an activist or not. I don't think you can live life in America and sustain the quality of life without being an activist. So you just have to have tremendous wealth to rise above race, class, and everything else. And I don't know too many people who have to do that. But to young people and to people in our age group, I would to say that we have to keep going. We have to petition, protest, work, share, collaborate, and work together to make a better place.
No, you're absolutely right. And not give up.
Right. As you know, I use that Polar Bear platform in the water to preach, to say to people that we're not just out here exercising, we're trying to build a world that's representative of that faith and community in the water. So we start out by saying to people, treat people on land the way we treated you in that water, welcoming, open arms, no matter who you are, no matter what your story is. When you come to the vineyard, you've made a certain level of status. So when you eat a meal, tip your servers. And when you eat a meal, give back to the food pantry because we have homeless and housing people everywhere we go. We acknowledge that we are on the land of indigenous people. And acknowledgement is the first step to reparations. And no matter where you go in America, you're always on indigenous land. And lastly, but not least, get involved in your community. Do something for somebody else other than yourself. Make it more than an act of kindness. Make it a way of life.
Thing, right, to make someone else's happy. Okay, I cannot thank you enough. I know you have a big graduation to go to.
Yes, tonight is the high school graduation.
Yeah. No, it's like what class is graduating?
This is Cambridge Ranger Line class of 2023. About 300 to 400 kids will be graduating tonight.
Yay! Yay! Okay. Go.
So, and one of the things I did when I was the assistant principal, we also gave them a voter registration card
Oh, great.
so they could be enfranchised.
Yes.
Franchised.
No, absolutely. It's voting is very important, and the choice of for whom you vote is important also. So great, wonderful. That's
Absolutely.
okay. Well, I'll see you at 7:30 next week or the week after.
All right. 4th of July. God.
July.
4th of July. Thank you.
That's what this is all about. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
That's right. Bye-bye.
So, folks, this is what we do at Renaissance House. We sit around and have polemics. And when you come to join us July 4th at the Inkwell, you will hear the words of Frederick Douglass and think to yourself, could I do that? Would I do that? See you next week.